On a winter night in 39 AD, Rome froze. Not because of the cold, but because every family knew this was the night someone's daughter would disappear. Imagine being 14 years old, already in your night clothes, thinking the world outside your window is calm, when suddenly you hear soldiers in armor walking down your street. You grew up hearing that a call from the emperor was something special. No one warned you it could come without any warning. No one warned you the guards would walk into your home as if your home already belonged to them. And absolutely no one warned you why they carried a lamp covered in red cloth, a lamp they would place in front of your door. In a few minutes, you'll hear your mother whisper your name as if saying it too loudly might make the gods angry. In a few minutes, your father will force a smile he cannot hold. And in a few minutes, you'll learn the truth every rich family fears. The palace doesn't invite daughters, it takes them. And if you think Flavia's nightmare begins here, you're wrong. What's waiting for her inside the palace makes this moment feel kind. This isn't a rumor. This was the night the Garden of Venus opened. A ritual so scary that Rome buried every trace of it. If hidden horrors of the past interest you, subscribe, hit the like button. And once you reach the moment that bothers you most, tell me where you're watching from. Let's begin. And the girl who will learn the truth first is Flavia. Remember Flavia, because everything you're about to learn created the man who will soon decide her fate. To understand how a human being can rot from the inside and come out as a creature able to destroy an entire empire, you must go back to the beginning, back to the family that gave birth to him and the shadows that shaped him long before Rome learned to fear his name. Caligula did not appear out of madness. He was born into glory. The son of Germanicus, Rome's golden general, the man whose very presence could quiet an army and excite a city. The boy should have received honor, strength, and nobility. Instead, something far more damaging got into him. His childhood did not happen in gardens or teachers' rooms. It happened on the rough edge of the empire, in military camps soaked with sweat, iron, and the metallic smell of war. He learned to walk between rows of tough soldiers, the ground shaking with the thud of their sandals. The soldiers loved seeing their commander's son in tiny armor and called him Caligula, Little Boot, a nickname meant with love, but one that would soon stick to a far darker story. But even then, something inside him bent. That frontier world taught him its first rule. Power isn't given to you, it's taken. And once you take it, you don't ask forgiveness for how you use it. It was the first crack in the child's soul, and the cracks were about to get deeper. The crushing blow came with the mysterious death of Germanicus. Overnight, the beloved child became a target. He watched helplessly as his mother and brothers were sent away, locked up, and killed one by one. No enemy army, no wild tribe, just the cold will of Emperor Tiberius. And then came Capri, the island where Rome imagined Tiberius retired in peace, but where something evil grew behind palace doors, and the twisted lessons Caligula learned here. Flavia will pay for them in ways she cannot yet imagine. Caligula, barely more than a boy, was forced to live beside the man who had destroyed his family. Capri was not a safe place. It was a golden coffin sealed with fear. For 6 choking years, he survived under the watch of an emperor who trusted no one and killed without reason. There, Caligula learned a new rule, one far darker than the first. To live, you must smile at the man you want to destroy. He hid every tear, swallowed every shake of anger, and bowed to the killer of his blood. And while he stayed outwardly obedient, the cracks in his mind grew wider, widening until something cold and angry slipped through. So when Tiberius finally died in 37 AD and the Senate lifted Caligula, now 24, onto the throne, Rome burst with relief. A new beginning, a new prince. The son of Germanicus had come to clean the rot. And for a moment he did. He freed prisoners, destroyed the records of Tiberius's spies, cut hated taxes, poured gold into the streets, games, and feasts. Rome believed it had been saved. But the man who will one day reach for Flavia has not fully awakened yet. His darkness is only stretching its wings. But salvation was only the mask, because near the end of that first year, a sickness struck so hard that the emperor hung between life and death. And when he rose from that bed, something important had not returned with him. The boy who learned to hide his hatred on Capri no longer needed to hide anything at all. Standing on top of the Palatine Hill, staring down at a city that worshipped him, Caligula finally understood a terrible truth. At the peak of total power, there are no gods left above you, only victims below. The cheers of the crowds, the shaking silence of the Senate, these did not humble him. His sanity fell away like dead skin, and beneath it came out the creature Capri had carved. Kindness twisted into madness. Justice turned into cruelty. And within the darkness of his thoughts, an idea began to harden. Women of noble blood were not citizens, not daughters, not humans. They were tools. And the first tool he will test is waiting on a night Flavia does not yet know will destroy her life. This change didn't fall on Rome like a thunderstorm. It crept into the city like a sickness. Slow, quiet, impossible to trace. A poison that seeped beneath marble floors and into rich homes until it reached the people who believed themselves safest. And somewhere across Rome, Flavia's household heard the same knock. The knock no family dared answer, but no one was allowed to refuse. It began with a visit. The emperor's messengers did not carry swords that day. They carried scrolls sealed with purple, a color that meant life or death. Inside those scrolls was the demand no parent dared refuse. Send your daughter, not just any daughter, the most beautiful, the most pure, the most politically useful. Families called an honor. They knew it was a death sentence wearing perfume. To deny the emperor was treason. To obey him was to hand your child to the beast. The girls were taken to a hidden wing of the palace, a place Caligula named with cruel irony the Garden of Venus. Flavia stepped across this doorway, believing she still had control. She would lose that belief before sunrise. At first glance, it was paradise. Pink marble walls, silk-like beds, exotic perfumes, and servants who moved like shadows, guessing every need. The daughters of Rome stepped inside, believing they had been chosen for sacred service. But slowly, painfully, they realized the truth. Paradise was only the decoration. The prison was everything beneath it. And the real purpose of this place, the horror it hid, was still waiting to show itself. And the worst part, this was only the beginning. Because once Flavia's call came, she would learn the garden did not break girls quickly. It broke them slowly enough for them to understand every step of their undoing. The jewels they were forced to wear weren't decorations. They were chains, heavy gold, cold against their skin, marking each girl as state-owned property. The see-through silks were worse. Clothing designed not to cover them, but to expose them, to remind them that their bodies no longer belonged to themselves. Their names were the first thing Caligula erased. Real names were dangerous. Real names meant identity. So, he replaced them with numbers, jokes, and embarrassing nicknames whispered by the emperor himself. With every stripped identity, the Garden of Venus tightened its grip. But the true weapon of the system wasn't jewelry, silk, or even fear. It was waiting, a torture that spilled no blood and left no visible scars, yet emptied them from the inside out. They never knew when the call would come. It could be tonight. It could be weeks from now. And every moment in between was a death by waiting. The echo of guard sandals in the hallway made their hearts burst with terror. Breathing became hard. Sleep became impossible. By the time Caligula ever touched them, the mind damage was already complete. They were prey softened for the killing. And when the call finally arrived, it led them not to a private room, but to the emperor's nightly theater, the banquets. The young women were paraded before Rome's elite like exotic animals on display. Not guests, but living decorations. Caligula walked among them with the pride of a butcher choosing cuts of meat. He commented loudly on their bodies, mocking, praising, ranking, stripping away the last bits of dignity they held on to. But the real cruelty wasn't his voice. It was the silence of the men who should have protected them. Fathers, uncles, fiancés, all seated at tables of honor, forced to nod at the emperor's dirty words, their smiles stretched so tight they looked carved on. Any flicker of discomfort, any shake of disgust could sentence them or the girl to immediate death. That silence was its own kind of death. And then came the final act. Not chaos, not frenzy, but a ritual practice like theater. Soft music played to cover the screams. Selected watchers watched in forced admiration, and unspoken rules controlled every movement the victim had to make. This wasn't a pleasure for Caligula. This was choreography, a show, a display that he owned not just bodies but souls. And Flavia, standing under torchlight, realized the emperor didn't even see her as human anymore. He saw her as a classroom where he practiced cruelty. Take Flavia, daughter of a respected leader. When she crossed the doorway of the Garden of Venus for the first time, she still believed she might serve in ceremonies or walk beside the emperor. For the first days, Caligula showered her with gifts, attention, even fake gentleness. It relaxed her. It softened her. It set the trap. And when it finally snapped, when the illusion shattered and the truth showed its teeth, Flavia understood the one rule that controlled this palace. You cannot resist a man who believes he is a god. Caligula used cruelty with skill. He switched between brutality and fake affection, beating a girl one night and crying in her lap the next as he offered jewels worth kingdoms. This emotional back and forth rewired the mind. Victims no longer saw him clearly. Hope and terror blended. Comfort and violence mixed. The one who broke them became the only one who could soothe them, a dependence created to make escape impossible. But Caligula wasn't finished. He destroyed unity next. Flavia tried to disappear into the crowd of victims. But in the Garden of Venus, being invisible could get you killed just as quickly as being noticed. He ranked the girls who pleased him most, who disappointed him, who would receive favor or punishment. He turned them against one another until they fought for scraps of safety. Each girl sees the others not as friends, but as competition for survival. Unity died, and once unity died, the emperor owned everything. And when he got tired of one of them, he didn't free her. He sold her. Secret auctions inside the palace walls offered broken young women to senators and generals, the same men who governed Rome by day. Caligula forced them to participate, staining their hands with the same dirt that covered his own. Shared guilt is the strongest leash. And now the empire's elite were chained to him by their silence. But the shame did not stop there. Families were ordered to be grateful. Some fathers were forced to host celebration feasts after their daughters were hurt. They toasted their child's honor while swallowing their horror like poison. In the palace, gratitude became another word for despair. And through all this, watching tightened like a rope. No corner was safe. Guards, slaves, spies, eyes everywhere. Even one quiet cry in the night could be reported as rebellion. Inside the Garden of Venus, layer after layer of humanity was scraped away until nothing remained but flesh, fear, and the echo of footsteps coming closer. By 40 and 41 AD, the palace air had become toxic enough to choke. The girls who once arrived with bright eyes and soft voices were now skeleton-like ghosts drifting through the hallways. Many stopped speaking entirely. Some stopped responding. Their minds retreated inward, hiding in the last place Caligula couldn't reach. Doctors noted disconnection, souls separating from bodies just to survive. But the truth the court tried hardest to hide was far darker. The suicides had begun, and once they began, they did not stop. Some girls broke, others shattered. Flavia, she was caught somewhere in the middle, too frightened to die, too broken to live. Whispers among the servants spoke of 6 confirmed suicides, but everyone knew the truth. 6 was only the number the palace failed to hide. The real count was buried under marble floors and royal silence. And Flavia began to wonder if surviving was actually the cruelest outcome. Death, once the thing they feared most, became the only horizon that offered relief. A final act of free choice in a world where they owned nothing else. Not even their own names. Some cut their veins with pieces of shattered vases. Some tore strips of silk from their fancy dresses and made ropes from them. Others simply climbed the balconies and stepped off, letting gravity deliver the mercy their emperor never would. For these girls, the cold arms of death were kinder than Caligula's touch. But the emperor was not satisfied. In his delusion of godhood, he created a new cruelty, a torment so twisted it attacked the victims through the people they loved. He allowed parents to visit their daughters, not to rescue them, not to comfort them, but to watch them suffer. The girls were painted, perfumed, dressed in silks to hide their bruises. They were forced to smile, forced to act, forced to lie, their horror hidden behind makeup and shaking lips. And the parents, under the unblinking eyes of soldiers, had to pretend this was a celebration. If a mother's voice cracked, she was killed. If a daughter dared let the mask slip, her family paid the price. Everyone was trapped in a horrible theater, swallowing their pain, while the creator of their suffering watched with satisfaction. But then, Caligula made the single mistake every tyrant eventually makes. He embarrassed the men who carried the swords. Destroying women wasn't enough. He needed to embarrass the pillars of Rome itself. He dragged senators to watch their wives be hurt. He mocked commanders of the guard, stripping them of dignity in front of their own men. He forced honored soldiers to say vulgar passwords designed to shame them. And among those soldiers was a man whose loyalty had once been unbreakable. Cassius Chaerea, a tough veteran and faithful servant of Germanicus. Caligula's mockery of him was endless. The emperor thought himself untouchable. He believed no blade would ever dare rise against him. He was wrong. The hatred in Chaerea and the conspirators changed into something no longer political. It became survival. Caligula, once a useful tool, had become a deadly tumor eating through the Roman state. And on January 24th, 41 AD, the tension finally exploded. During the palace games, Caligula left through a private underground hallway, the Cryptoporticus, to take a bath. He entered the dim stone passageway, believing himself immortal. He would not leave alive. Chaerea and the conspirators blocked his path. There was no speech, no trial, no warning, only steel. The first strike, a blade to the neck, shattered his voice box, silencing the man who had demanded to be worshipped as a god. His cries choked in a flood of his own blood. Then came the frenzy. More than 30 stab wounds tore into him. The self-proclaimed Jupiter of Rome fell to the ground, twisting, begging, dying like the terrified mortal he truly was. His life ended in a puddle of blood. Embarrassment carved across his twisted face. But the nightmare was not over. Just a few meters away, sealed inside the Garden of Venus, the young women heard the chaos, the screams, the metal clashing, the thunder of rushing feet. They huddled in corners, shaking, unable to understand whether this was salvation or another form of doom. Then silence. Not the heavy silence of oppression, but the empty, unfamiliar silence of a world where the monster was suddenly gone. Yet none of them dared move, because after years in that palace, they understood one thing with terrifying clarity. When something ends in Rome, something worse often begins, and they were right to fear. Caligula's death did not create a golden dawn. It opened a void. His Germanic bodyguards, discovering their emperor dead, burst with blind fury. The palace turned into a slaughterhouse within minutes. They cut down servants, officials, anyone unlucky enough to cross their path. For the young women, the Garden of Venus became a death trap. Some ran barefoot through hallways littered with broken glass and bodies. Others, frozen by years of training, blocked themselves in their rooms, gripping each other in the dark, waiting to see whether the next hand on the door would kill them or free them. Hours later, when the blood haze finally cleared, an unlikely figure came out from hiding. Claudius, Caligula's shaking uncle, dragged from behind a curtain and pushed onto the royal throne. Claudius, ever the survivor, faced an impossible truth. If Rome learned what had happened inside the Garden of Venus, the system, the involvement, the noble family's participation, the empire itself might crack. So he made a decision darker than silence and far more convenient. For the survivors of the Garden of Venus, Rome's solution was not justice. It was payment, a cold deal meant to choke the truth before it could take a single breath. The palace returned the young women to their families wrapped in gold, clothed in expensive fabrics, and carrying dowries large enough to silence an entire city. But every coin carried the same unspoken command. Forget. Forget what happened. Forget who did it. Forget the daughters Rome fed to a god who wasn't a god at all. No trials were held. No partners in crime were punished. Rome simply folded the truth into the shadows and buried it under layers of official silence. The girls returned to their villas. But the people who came home were not the ones who left. There were shells, walking corpses, bodies that still breathed, but souls that had died on the Palatine Hill and were never allowed to return. In cruel Roman society, a noble woman's worth lived and died with her purity. And though these girls were victims, children crushed beneath a system they could not resist, the stain followed them like a curse. Family honor was ranked above truth, above compassion, above their lives. Most never married. Most never lived. They were hidden inside rooms in distant wings of their homes, kept away like shameful relics, seen only by the servants who left food at their doors. Their trauma unfolded in painful, predictable patterns. A hand on their shoulder triggered panic. A sudden noise made them collapse in fear. Sleep brought nightmares so real they woke screaming night after night. Physical captivity had ended, but the prison in their minds had no guards to kill, no emperor to overthrow, no key that could unlock them. For them, freedom was not a victory. It was a sentence, a lifelong exile inside their own bodies. Rome looked away. Rome always looked away. It was easier to blame the women than to face its own corruption. Easier to bury a crime than face a civilization's rotting foundation. Because the truth of Caligula's reign was never about one man. It was about the system that built him, fed him, protected him, and allowed the Garden of Venus to exist in the first place. Later, historians could argue over the exact details, whether Suetonius added to the story, whether rival dynasties made his cruelty bigger. But the coming together of sources tells us one thing without question. A machine of abuse existed. A machine built to satisfy one man's darkest desires. And Rome allowed it to operate in silence. This wasn't an isolated horror. It was a flaw in the empire's very design. Rome gathered its lawmaking, judicial, military, and even divine power into the hands of a single man. No checks, no limits, no escape if the wrong man climbed the throne. Caligula proved how thin the line truly is between civilization and savagery, between order and chaos, between ruler and monster. And that line was drawn not on marble, but on the bodies of the nameless girls who died in the Garden of Venus. Rome built wonders that survived thousands of years, arenas, aqueducts, law codes. But it failed at the simplest duty of any society, to protect its most vulnerable from the predators at the top. The story of these women is not just a historical tragedy. It is a warning that echoes across time. A nation may reach the summit of power, but if it sacrifices human dignity in the process, its legacy will be written not in glory, but in shame. History is often shaped by the victors, but shadows have a way of surviving. The erased names, the unsent letters, the tears dried into silk pillows. They remain in the margins Rome tried to burn away, and now they belong to us. We centuries later must decide whether to look at those shadows or repeat them, because evil does not always announce itself with swords and fire. Sometimes evil wears a crown. Sometimes evil hides behind silence. And sometimes evil thrives simply because too many people choose not to be outraged. If this story unsettles you, let it. If it angers you, let it. And if it made you think about the cost of unchecked power, then the voices Rome tried to erase have finally been heard.